Over the last couple of weeks, there's been various policies announced by government looking at making some changes to the housing sector, in everything from granny flats in the backyard to potentially doing your building inspection by Zoom call. However, some of these changes also affecting the work of Kāinga Ora in particular. And, well, that is something which very much impacts the work of the Salvation Army. Joining me on the program from the Social Policy and Parliamentary Unit, Lieutenant Colonel Ian Hutson. Ian, kia ora, good morning. Thanks for your time today.
Kia ora, good to be with you.
Certainly important to recognise that there is a housing crisis, and this affects people in some ways from all stratas of society. But to be fair, like everything else, those at the bottom rungs are affected perhaps more deeply and more heavily than others. I know, Ian, that you have concerns about some of the changes of policy regarding Kāinga Ora and the likely impact that will have on the people that you work with. Talk to us about your concerns. What is it that bothers you?
Well, what we've heard is that Kāinga Ora is not going to be building net new social housing from it. They're going to become a landlord. That's their primary function, according to the government, and so they're not going to be building new houses. Now, the thing was that over the last few years, it took a while for Kāinga Ora to get their act together, you could say. I probably would have taken anybody.
I think Phil Twyford lost his portfolio over how long it took, in fact.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, and it would be the same for any group that took this on, that you have to build up your capacity to do it. You haven't been doing it before, and they've been kind of run down by previous governments. But so last year, they built 4,000 new public houses or state houses, social houses, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
That was finally looking like we were getting around to actually making a dent in all of this. And now what's happened is, in a way, the plug has been completely pulled out of that. They will continue to build, but it'll only really be to replace what was already there. And so what we have is 25,000 people on the housing register. These are people in significant housing need, and that's not we're not going to be able to address it. I know the government is pointing to organisations just like ourselves,
yep,
saying that, well, it seems to be saying that we will pick up the slack. They'll work through us, though the amount of dollars they're throwing in our direction don't stack up in terms of actually that being able to. But even if there was enough money, you can't expect organisations like us.
What do you like with a hammer and a skill saw, Ian? I mean, is this a new calling for you? Is that you're actually going to be building houses for the marginal in society? Is that something, as a skill set that you've got?
Well, if you were to ask my wife, she'd probably die laughing, because I can't seem to even get the minor repairs around the house done, never mind building one. But we are building houses,
yep,
significantly, but nowhere near the scale that's needed,
yep,
and it will take a while, and there's not the money there for it.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Some people have commented on this one to say that there were unintended consequences in the scale and the speed that government will basically Kāinga Ora building houses, and not just houses, building whole neighbourhoods. And a neighbourhood close to where I live was almost totally demolished and rebuilt as multi-story units. And I mean, a massive temporary boost in employment, so much so that they had to lift some caps on immigration to get the people that we need. It put the cost of building anything through the roof, pun intended, because the government was such a big player in this market that nobody else could get a look in. You couldn't get a plumber for months. That there were some unintended consequences in that it overheated the housing market. Yes, Kāinga Ora were building new neighbourhoods, but nobody else could get a slice of the pie. What would be your response to that comment be, Ian?
Yeah, well, I think there's a number of things there, because, well, in a way, the unintended consequence of them stopping building, I suspect, given the high interest rates and all the other factors there,
Yeah.
is that a lot of builders are now not going to have work.
Yeah.
And I expect some of them will leave the country to where they can go or look for it. We'll lose that capacity,
Yeah.
because at the moment people aren't building because property developers, house prices have dipped a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
They want to make money. They're probably not that interested in social housing because there's not enough money in it,
Yeah.
but they won't be doing any other building. And so we will lose capacity of people able to build.
I know that there's been a whole bunch of tradespeople and self-employed who have just basically been on hold for months now, waiting to see what the government will do. They're trying to keep staff on board and all of those sorts of things. Well, they have their answer now, I suppose, but it's not going to be good news for them. It's not going to be good news for their subcontractors either.
That's right. So, I mean, that's in the building front. But when you look at what other moves the government is doing, which I don't think is bad in one level, but they are looking to exit from motels and emergency accommodation. But if you're not also building somewhere for them to live, and there's been quite a number of changes around the housing, like with landlords obviously getting tax breaks, as it were, and also they're working at the moment on a bill in which there could be no cause evictions for people in private rental or any rental. And you can sort of see the people at the bottom are starting to get it really hard because they can be evicted whether they've done anything wrong. That's what, if the legislation is passed, will end up. It does seem like, whether it's intended or not, it almost appears like an attack on the people at the bottom.
Yeah, certainly. Now, it is... I mean, the government isn't just doing this to attack poor people or to annoy you, Ian, of course. There'll be some reason behind the policy changes. Who wins from this strategy, do you think? Who is this policy in favour of? Who's it supporting?
Well, that's a complicated, probably, question and the answer. But, I mean, some of what I said there, I think that some of it is actually about a time where people are concerned about money. So we're looking at, I don't like to always get into the tax debate because that's a whole other one, but in some ways it is caught up with that because we say we can't afford to build these houses. We've got too much debt. We're ready to build roads. We're ready to give people tax breaks. We're not willing to look at the wealth tax, which incorporates some of this, or capital gains tax, all of those things which tend to favour the more wealthy. And the way we've chosen is not to help the people at the bottom. We've tended to be geared towards helping those at the top, and the priorities of people who aren't homeless are the ones that are being catered for. It's not like trying to set up a them and us. It's not like that, but
some people have made it that simple and said this is a pro-landlord, anti-renter type of legislation, and not just the legislation around Kāinga Ora and the rate of houses being built, but generally the housing policy seems to be pro-landlord. Would you agree with that, or is that a simplification, do you think?
Oh, well, I think it ends up being like that. It's very hard to sometimes understand what drives policy, but you do sometimes wonder if there is lobbying that gets, there are voices that get heard and there are voices that don't get heard. And I think we try to represent the people that don't get heard, and it feels like they really aren't being heard. They won't be the ones that hold the banners, or they'll be sleeping in a tent or sleeping in a car, and no, they probably won't vote. So. You know what I mean? They get left out, and the important people get heard.
Yeah.
Whoever you
Well,
for.
exactly. And given that we found out recently that just about all MPs have a rental property as a side hustle, perhaps, well, not accusing anybody of anything, but perhaps they identify more with the landlord than the renter in that capacity, if that's a fair way of saying it.
And I think I wouldn't want anyone to think that, 'cause most landlords are probably very good. But the thought of the fact that people can be discriminated against in a no-cause eviction
Yeah.
situation, could be because they're Māori, it could be because they're LGBTQ, it could be, I don't know, because they're disabled or anything that, or mental health, whatever. They could be, no, they haven't done anything wrong, but they could be evicted. No reason given.
Just trying to find some bright side to this, Ian, and I recognise that maybe there isn't a bright side, honestly. Maybe I'm trying too hard to be optimistic. But is it perhaps the case that the government has become the landlord to too many proportionately in New Zealand? That there should be a balance of, yes, the government should step in, they should support those who are doing it tough, but they shouldn't be the only one to provide housing and emergency housing. There should be organisations such as yourself. There should be a mix of government and agency and private landlords that perhaps with the incentives and the financial structure that we've had recently, that things have got a little bit out of whack, and it's been mostly the government who've been involved in this part of our society. This is in some ways redressing the balance, or am I being too optimistic, Ian?
Well, I think before this government came in, we were, or even before Labour came in, the previous government, we were saying it should be both. We're advocating for both.
Yeah.
We recognise that Kāinga Ora had more capacity than the rest, but the previous government didn't seem to.
That's right.
The previous government didn't seem to be as interested as we thought they should be in engaging with people like ourselves and community providers, CHIPs. They seemed to put all the eggs in one basket, and we were frustrated with that.
Yeah.
But what we were worried about was that when the next one comes in, they're going to do away with Kāinga Ora.
Yep.
And because that's to me, that's a totally, with the capacity in one sector has been built up, and the other one now can be. But if you just go completely the other way, it's going to really, at the end, to us, it's like a disaster.
Yeah,
basically.
Exactly.
Both end, it's not going switch one way then the other. And what we've got is now we've turned the tap off, and some of it seems about saving money, which is separate to whoever does it, because they haven't turned the tap on to the same extent money-wise for the community providers either. So, we agree with that. It shouldn't just be the government. And in comparison to other countries, though, social housing, whether it's government or other community organisations, we are way under compared to most of what Europe has. It's a much bigger proportion of the rental market is social housing.
Yeah.
We haven't done that. We've left it to the private market, which has got to be way too expensive now for people on the lower incomes. They just cannot live their life outside of poverty or near poverty in the private rental market. It's too much, and the accommodation supplement, we've talked to you about that in the past, is inadequate now to bridge that gap. So
it's as if we've been running to catch up, but we've given up the race before the finish line is in sight in that regard. We'll certainly understand your frustrations in this space. It is perhaps, again, to try and inject some optimism, a little bit of wait and see how this pans out. But in the meantime, we're in the middle of winter. There's people sleeping rough. There's families sleeping in cars. For these people, winter just got a little bit bleaker. And hey, thank you for the work that the Salvation Army does, helping the poorest of the poor in our communities. Of course, you can find out more about the work done by the Salvation Army at salvationarmy.org.nz. Ian, kia ora, thanks so much for your time today.
Good to be with you. Have a good day.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.